休困气，午夜朝气妙人气。无父无君无法纪，为非作歹有天比。修得当手皆福利，媳妇一死也就齐。哪知不测其祸，其旦夕，那黄毛孽畜再回击。平凡不是好得意，不幸后事却成谜。
Black Myth Wukong is a game I had very high expectations for. I was really waiting for this game before its release, but I only got the chance to actually play it now, almost 2 years after the game came out. I managed to avoid any spoilers or opinions about the game. The only thing I knew was that it had a very high rating and almost won a Game of the Year award, alongside Metaphor ReFantasio. But that's a topic for another video. And so the moment finally came. I finished the game and it's complicated. On the one hand, I think no game could really reach the bar that I have set, or rather the bar that Elden Ring set. I tried really hard not to do this, but it's simply impossible not to compare it to Elden Ring or other From Software games. The game is asking for it itself. It's important to note that I'm glad that I finished the game and I can confidently recommend it to you. I think that if it wasn't for my desire to share my opinion on the game with people, I would have dropped it after chapter 2, because I thought the game had already shown me everything it was capable of. My opinion of the game changed more than once throughout the playthrough, but let's go through it step by step. As always, let's start with the story. Well, on the one hand, as far as I understand, the story is based on the book Journey to the West and acts as a sort of what-if sequel. And it really feels like being familiar with the source material is almost required to understand what's happening in Wukong. Very often, characters appear literally for a single episode and then either never show up again or play a very minor secondary role, as if they are references meant for those who are in the know. The same thing happens with events that are briefly mentioned in the dialogue or shown in chapter-ending cutscenes. For a casual player unfamiliar with the literature, most of this is simply impossible to understand. On the other hand, the story in this game, for the average player, exists mostly as a formality. It serves as a setup and the reason for our character to travel from point A to point B, nothing more. Because of that, I believe the story will be perceived very differently depending on your background knowledge, and I strongly recommend familiarizing yourself with the book first before playing Wukong. It's also important to mention that the cutscenes in this game are made at an incredibly high level. Even though I often didn't understand what was happening on screen or why it was happening, I was never bored watching them. You can grab your tomatoes now, but before you throw them at me, just hear me out. This is not a Soulslike. The only things taken from Soulslike here are the lack of difficulty selection and bonfires as save points. In reality, this game is much closer to a God of War reboot than the Souls series. In Soulslike, the most important thing is that your death actually means something. Losing all your currency alone adds a lot of pressure. You don't want to die, so you play very cautiously. Here, death means nothing. Only after finishing the game did I find out that you lose part of your accumulated level experience when you die. I never even noticed this throughout the entire playthrough. Another important factor is that in Soulslike, enemies play by the same rules as you do. That is something that always attracted me to their games. Here, as in many action RPGs, this isn't the case. Forget about enemy poise or interrupting their attacks, with a few exceptions, of course. Now, the most important part. The game has a set of downsides and limitations that were intentionally designed and are a part of the gameplay. Why do I say that? Because as you progress through the game, character upgrades, not player skill, give you tools to deal with these problems. The game has two defensive options, dodging and heavy attack using focus. For simplicity, let's call this parrying with heavy attack or just parrying. Wow, cool, you might say. And yes, in theory that sounds great. Two defensive options should be more than enough. But in practice, about half of Wukong's moveset has attack animations that lock your character in place and provide no invisibility frames. This means that while performing a combo, for example, you can dodge at any moment, only on say first, second and fourth attacks. In other cases, you can only dodge after the attack animation finishes itself. In practice, this means that even if you react in time and press the correct dodge or heavy attack button, the boss still hits you, knocks you back and depletes half of your HP. Alright, that's clear. Now, why is this an intentional limitation and why is the game aware of it? As you level up, you unlock a ton of skills like shorter attack animations, reduce damage while you're in those locked animations, and longer windows for parrying and dodging. You have no idea how long it took me to accept this fact. Out of 40 hours I've played, I hated the game for this decision for about the first 15, cursing the damn dodge and parry. Why only 15 hours? What changed after that? From my perspective, only the first chapter was truly difficult. I would call it a harsh trial for players with extensive Souls-like experience, like myself, but for players unfamiliar with the genre, I think it would cause even more problems. I don't even want to tell you how long the Fire Bear took me to beat. After finishing the first chapter, however, the number of skills and spells the player receives increases significantly. I'd say the growth between chapter 1 and chapter 2 is the biggest in the entire game. And honestly, from that point on, almost nothing caused me serious issues. Almost everything took me 2 or 3 tries at most, if not the first try, with some exceptions. Starting from the end of chapter 4, the game becomes challenging again. Not every boss is difficult, but the overall difficulty increases. Enemies don't just hit harder, they have more complex movesets and mechanics. You can't just beat them by out-leveling or brute force anymore. This segment is already pretty long, but I have to talk about the bosses. When I heard about the number of bosses in Wukong, which is 104, you should have seen my face. Honestly, I was afraid that most of them would be repetitive or simple reskins of previous bosses, but to my surprise, that wasn't the case. Almost all bosses in the game are genuinely unique, and reskins bosses can literally be counted on one hand. And the coolest part is that there are about 10 bosses, some of them back to back, that made me react like, holy shit, this is one of the coolest boss designs or boss fights I've ever seen or experienced in my life. You encounter a boss roughly every 10 minutes, whether it's a story-related boss or an optional one. And you know what? It's not as cool as I thought it would be. In the Souls series, yes, I know I'm already annoying with these comparisons, but hear me out. Bosses don't appear that often and act as the main event of location, dungeon, or the whole chapter. Here, the game almost turns into a boss rush simulator, where the absence of a boss only means there's one lurking around the next corner, just standing there, menacingly. My feeling of excitement before a boss fight was unfortunately replaced with the sense of routine. This game is unbelievably beautiful. I don't know how much of the budget went into visuals, but this might be the most beautiful game I've ever seen. This is partially due to the environments we're shown. We constantly see decorated temples, castles, mountain ranges, canyons, deserts, and the sky itself. The visual pleasure I got from the game was immense. And the attention to the detail. Absolutely every temple and castle is decorated as if the developers expected players to carefully examine them, even though I'm sure most people didn't even see it. After completing each chapter, the game presents a short story, each time drawn in a different art style. As someone who isn't very familiar with Chinese culture and history, I didn't fully understand how these stories connect to the main plot, but I still enjoyed them. Even as standalone stories, they're full of meaning and made me just sit there and think to myself, man. In my opinion, the game has some pacing issues. The first act is nothing but direct confrontations with enemies and bosses, and the damned bear is a real trial. I cannot stress this enough, but let's not talk about him. The second, third, and fourth acts completely shatter the initial impression of the game and give us the opportunity to explore. Not an open world per se, but massive locations packed with content, chests, quests, and even secret bosses and whole areas. I can't say this is bad, but my opinion of the game changed more than once during the playthrough. The game has RPG elements, and over time you become stronger while enemies become weaker. This is important because in my experience the game stops being difficult. Stats upgraded, skills upgraded, spells unlocked, potions upgraded. With all of these, there are only a few rare boss exceptions which still remain really hard. Speaking of health potions, like in Bloodborne, you can replenish them on the go without resting at a bonfire, by killing enough enemies or consuming will. Why? Considering that you can teleport to a bonfire at any moment of the game, even during combat, without any penalties. Because of this, it's one of the easiest challenging games out there. In my opinion, the game is very repetitive. Yes, Wukong has 3 combat styles, but all of them revolve around the staff. Yes, you have different armor sets that provide different buffs, as well as a huge number of transformations and curios that can be swapped depending on your build. Sure, however, none of this fundamentally changes either your gameplay loop or your overall play style as Wukong. So I honestly don't see why anyone would want to replay this game aside from like no-hit challenges or speedruns. For those who didn't realize yet, my scoring system is auto-made, by the way, and extremely subjective. But this category specifically is the peak of subjectivity. If I'd wanted to, I could give it a 0 here. But all jokes aside, what boosts the score in this category is my experience with the first chapter. It was genuinely difficult for me to beat bosses and adapt to the controls, and after each victory I often felt like I earned it. To give the game credit, I enjoyed exploring locations, studying temples, talking to NPCs, and even meditating. However, beyond that, the game didn't leave much of an emotional mark on me, and none of the characters will stay in my memory. I won't remember a single character other than Wukong himself, Erlang, who we face at the very beginning of the game, wink wink, and the horse who converted to Buddhism.
Suffering, yes. But does one not weave the threads of one's destiny?
To be fair, I don't even remember the horse's name. Black Myth Wukong is a game I'm genuinely glad I finished, but I can't call it an unquestionable masterpiece. It's not a genre-defining revolution, and it's not the next Elden Ring, but it's also far from a forgettable or mediocre project. This is a very beautiful, ambitious, and at times truly outstanding game that, unfortunately, doesn't always execute its own ideas equally well. In some moments, it surprises and impresses, and in others, it can feel tiring and even turn into routine. I can confidently recommend Wukong, especially if you're interested in Chinese mythology, strong visuals, and frequent boss fights. That said, I think it's important to understand in advance that this is not a Soulslike, and you shouldn't expect the same kind of experience you get from Software games. Before I reveal the final score, let me quickly explain how it's calculated, just in case. It's actually very simple. I use 5 evaluation criteria, each scored on a 10-point scale. In the end, I add all 5 scores together and divide the result by 5, which gives me a 5-point rating, essentially a star-based score. That's how the final rating is calculated. Now, thank you all very much for watching up until the end. I really appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That really helps the channel to grow, but I'm sure you've already heard that. So I wish you a very nice day, evening, or whatever it is, and see you later.